स्वागतम। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं चैव ततो जयमुदीरयेत्. Having bowed down to Narayana and Nara, the supreme human beings, and also to the goddess Saraswati, one should recite the Jaya epic. This is the beginning of the Mahabharata, the greatest epic of the world. The Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute in Pune undertook the gigantic work of preparing a critical edition of that great epic. It was Sir Ramakrishna Gopal Bhandarkar, a doyen of Indological studies, who wrote down these lines on a paper and thereby gave a green signal to the commencement of the auspicious work of that edition. Most of you are perhaps aware that this institute was founded on the 6th of July 1917, on the 80th birthday of Sir Ramakrishna Gopal Bhandarkar, as a birthday gift to him given by his colleagues and students. This work of preparing the critical edition was undertaken in April 1919, soon after the inception of the institute. A formal resolution to that effect had already been passed by the regulating council of the institute. Srimant Bhavan Rao alias Balasaheb Pant Pratinidhi, the chief of the Aun Sansthan, was the then president of the regulating council. In the meeting of the general body of the institute, held on the 6th July 1918, the Raja Sahab had offered his active and financial support to initiate that work, and had announced a donation of 1 lakh rupees for that purpose. Thus, the man of means stood by the side of the man of learning. The chief of Aund was a learned person and a man of vision. He had encouraged and financially supported a number of entrepreneurs, scholars, and artists. He soon understood the importance of the critical edition of that celebrated work. He also wanted to have the edition with illustrations, the paintings depicting important events in the Mahabharata. He got those paintings drawn, paid for the same from his own pocket, and donated all the paintings to the institute. Later on, when the institute was in acute need of money, he bought the same paintings back from the institute and thus offered financial support again to the institute. Dr. Vishnu Sitaram Sukhthankar, the general editor of the critical edition, once praised the Raja Sahab. He said, I just quote his words, "If you want me to point out just one man who is responsible for originating and furthering the project of the Mahabharata, he is sitting in front of you. I mean Srimant Balasaheb Pant Pratinidhi, the Raja of Aund." Whenever I think of the Raja Sahab, I am reminded of Kalidasa's words, Vasu tasya viborna kevalam gunavattapi paraprayojana. It means not only his wealth, but his outstanding virtuous qualities were also dedicated to the welfare of others. You may ask, what is a critical edition? And why is it necessary? We will come to that point later. Here I shall briefly say that a critical edition is an attempt to recover the text written by the author himself. This attempt is necessary in the case of a text that has multiple versions, out of which no version can be regarded as the text of the author. In the case of the text like the Rig Veda, we have an authentic version written carefully and supported by the systematic, uninterrupted oral tradition. There is a unique device that keeps the text of the Rig Veda intact. It is called Vikruti or Veda Vikruti. So it is free from corruptions mostly, not only in the case of the words, but also in the case of the letters and even the accents or swaras. Despite these facts, it was felt necessary to prepare a critical edition of the Rig Veda based on the manuscripts and also the oral tradition. In the case of the Rig Veda, the age-old tradition handed down to us by Guru Shishya Parampara, that is the lineage of teachers and pupils, is firmly established, and that tradition is more authentic than the written one. So it means the oral tradition is more authentic than the written tradition. Therefore, one would not find major differences between the printed critical edition and the text preserved in the oral tradition. In the case of other non-Vedic texts, there are a number of problems. The text of the Mahabharata has, for example, multiple versions, and one needs a special method in order to recover the text of the author. This text of the author is called autograph. That is, the text written by the author himself or by others, say his disciples, who wrote down the text under his supervision. As far as the Mahabharata is concerned, the text available to us is, in Suktankar's words, a bewildering profusion of versions as well as an amazing mixture of versions. It is distinct from every known other text except the Ramayana and Greek epics such as Iliad and Odyssey. After its composition, the great epic was for centuries handed down from bard to bard merely by the word of mouth, that is oral tradition. Towards the end of the 19th century, Pratap Chandra Roy, a Bengali scholar, had brought out his popular edition of the Mahabharata. This scholar had grasped the Mahabharata problem in all its essentials. But the time was not yet ripe for the actual preparation of a critical edition of the Mahabharata. He admitted that there can be no edition of the Mahabharata, how carefully edited soever, that would please scholars of every part of India. In these circumstances, it seemed almost impossible to recover the original authentic text of the Mahabharata. Moreover, there is a tradition that tells us about more than one versions of the Mahabharata, as many as 3 versions. The first version was called Jaya Samhita, which is mentioned in the lines or the benedictory verse I recited just now. The second edition was called the Bharata, and the third is called the Mahabharata. Thus, what we have now is the Mahabharata that has undergone many revisions, additions, and corrections or corruptions. The science of preparing a critical edition is called textual criticism. It was developed in the West and is adopted by scholars for preparing critical editions of Indian texts. This sub-branch is called Indian textual criticism. The methodology was developed by Suftenkar for preparing the critical edition of the Mahabharata, and the same method was adopted or applied to those of Ramayana and the Bhagavad Puran and many other texts. There is a general impression among many scholars that this science of textual criticism is a Western one, and that Indian scholars did not have any idea of the same. But it is not so. In India, there exists and still exists the science of textual criticism to some extent. There are a number of authors who have written their commentaries on important Sanskrit texts. And while commenting on the text, they consulted a number of manuscripts and tried to ascertain a correct reading. For example, I give the example of Nilakantha, one of the commentators of the Mahabharata. He wrote the famous commentary called Bharata Bhavadeepa, and he says at the outset of his commentary that he has used a number of manuscripts from different regions and has ascertained the correct reading, the best readings, and so on. He says, Bahun samarhutya vibhinna deshyan koshan vinishchitya cha pathamagriyam prachang gurunam anusrutya vacham arabhyate bharata bhavadeepa. It means that having collated a number of manuscripts from various regions and having ascertained the best readings, having followed the predecessors, now I begin the commentary called Bharata Bhavadeepa. While commenting on the Harivansha, Nilakantha mentions some of the readings from various recensions, various manuscripts. For example, there is a line in the Harivansha. It says, Nyagrodhascha Sunamacha Kankah Shankuh Subhumipyaha. Now here Nilakantha says, Gaudapathe Subhushana Itiva Tasyaiva Visheshanam. Anye tu Subhumipa iti Kansasya eva nama ahu. Pare punaha Kankushchaiva Subhumipa iti Shankupade Lopameva Kurvanti. Tatra Pathatatvam Vyasaha eva Veda. It means in the Gauda or Bengali manuscripts, there is a variant Subhushanaha, while others retain the reading Subhumipaha. And there are others who omit the name Shanku and have a totally different line or reading, Kankush Chaiva Subhumipaha. The essence of the reading, that is the correct reading, Nilakantha says Vyas alone knows, because he got confused about the correct reading. Today, the traditional Sanskrit Pandits use the same method for preparing the critical edition of Sanskrit texts, although they do not have the training on the lines of Western method. I must say that there is no one and the same methodology that can be applied to all Indian texts. We have certain guidelines in this science, but every text may need a special methodology. Such is the case with the Mahabharata as well. Here I must point out that the work of a critical edition is a very complicated and a challenging one. It was Dr. V.S. Suktankar who gave a concrete shape to the methodology for preparing the critical edition of Mahabharata. The methodology is based on the Western approach of studying Greek and Latin works and preparing the editions of the same. However, Suktankar realized that the methodology to be adopted for the Mahabharata needs special criteria that it was not possible and advisable to imitate the Western methodology in totality. The Mahabharata is unique in many respects. First, it is a gigantic work. The part of the Mahabharata, that is the first Parvan called Adi Parvan, that Suktankar edited, was about 4 times as great as the Greek epics, namely Iliad and Odyssey put together, and 1.5 times as our Ramayana. Before the edition of the Mahabharata by Bhandarkar Institute, there had been a number of printed editions. They are called the Calcutta edition, the Bombay edition, the Kumbakonam edition, and the Madras edition. They were based on the northern versions and the southern versions of the Mahabharata. These versions are called recensions. These editions I mentioned were based on groups of manuscripts called the northern recensions of manuscripts and the southern recension of manuscripts. And they were different or differed from each other in respect of the number of adhyayas, the number of verses in the adhyayas in each adhyaya, and the readings in the verses. These recensions are so divergent from each other that there prevails much uncertainty about the readings regarding the correctness of the text and so on. The printed editions were just representations or reproductions of these recensions with some cosmetic changes here and there. A common reader is at a loss to see so much difference between the printed editions and fails to decide which edition he should follow. The critical edition is therefore a remedy to this problem. A reader can safely rely on the more correct, more complete, and more thoughtfully edited text, although some portions he likes may not form a part of the critical edition. It will be given in an appendix. The need for a critical edition of the Mahabharata was felt by the Western scholars long ago, before the critical edition was published or prepared. It was towards the end of the 19th century when Professor Maurice Winternitz, an Austrian scholar, first made an appeal to the Assembly of Scholars. Professor Winternitz is known to Sanskrit students and scholars of Sanskrit for his monumental work, History of Indian Literature, originally in German. At the 11th International Congress of Orientalists, Professor Winternitz presented a paper on the South Indian manuscripts of the Mahabharata and expressed the need for a critical edition of that great epic. That is the edition which would be the only sound basis not only for Mahabharata studies in general, but also for the epic studies. Following his appeal, scholar formed an institute called Sanskrit Epic Text Society, just like Pali Text Society. However, they were quite skeptical about the fate of their efforts and thought that it was impossible to restore a critical text of the Mahabharata. However, a committee was appointed to consider the proposal of a critical edition. Professor Heinrich Lüders, a German scholar from Berlin, prepared a specimen of a critical edition. It consisted of 18 pages. He circulated that specimen among some scholars for their reviews. At the same time, some scholars began to work on the classification of the manuscripts of Mahabharata. However, the First Great World War proved to be a major blow to that scholarly activity. Against this background and the unfortunate end of the Western scholarly initiative, it was important to know why and how the Institute undertook the seemingly impossible task of the critical edition. Under the scheme of the critical edition, the Institute began the work and published in 1923 a tentative edition of the Virata Parvan of the Mahabharata under the editorship of Narayan Bapuji Utgikar. Copies of this specimen were distributed among renowned scholars in India, Europe, and America. The response was overwhelming and highly encouraging. Let me now explain how the work of the critical edition was done and what steps were taken to that effect. Before undertaking the work of the critical edition, Suktankar decided to take one particular version of the Mahabharata as the basis of that work. It was the Bombay edition with Nilakantha's commentary, published in 1863, that had already been used for the critical edition of the Virata Parvan prepared by Udgikar. The basic text is called Vulgate. It means it is the text which is popular and commonly known and accepted form of the text, as opposed to the critical edition. The critical edition is prepared on this Vulgate or the basic text, but it is considerably different, or it deviates from the Vulgate because it is further revised with the help of the evidence in the best manuscripts or group of manuscripts. The process of preparing a critical edition is divided into 4 stages. 1. Classification of manuscripts. 2. Recension. 3. Collation. And 4. Emendation. Let us see the first step, that is the classification of manuscript. There were hundreds of manuscripts of the Mahabharata written in different regions of India, in different periods of time, and in different scripts. These manuscripts had been deposited in manuscript libraries in India and abroad, and in devasthanas and private collections owned by kings and rich people. The exact number of the manuscript could not be ascertained, as there would be many more manuscripts that had not seen the day of the light so far. Suktankar undertook the editing of the first book, that is Adi Parvan. He could obtain as many as 235 manuscripts of the Adi Parvan, out of which 107 manuscripts were in Devanagari script. There were manuscripts of other scripts also, Indian scripts, that is Bengali 32, Granth or Tamil 31, Telugu 28, Malayalam 26, Nepali 5, Sharada in Kashmir 3, Maithili 1, Kannada 1, and Nandinagari 1. So he collected all these manuscripts and prepared the work. Next stage is recension. Recension means a particular group of manuscripts handed down to us. For finding the recensions, one has to study carefully all available manuscripts, then divide them systematically on the basis of the text found in those groups of manuscripts. One has to select the recension having the most trustworthy group of manuscripts, which is closer to the autograph, that is the text of the author. In the case of the Mahabharata, there are two major recensions, namely the northern recension and the southern recension. Now the next stage is collation. This involves an important method called collation. Collation means the recording, the evidence gathered from all the manuscripts selected for the purpose of the critical edition. Even obviously correct readings are also recorded faithfully. A proper and systematic collation is the key to ascertain a correct reading. We shall now see how the collation is done. Ordinarily, in the text reconstruction, a safe expedient is to take as basis the oldest of the best family of manuscripts and to authenticate in the critical edition the same. However, in the case of the Mahabharata, this general methodology does not work, because unlike many other texts, the text of Mahabharata is a fusion of a variety of texts. Even the oldest and the best type of manuscripts of this epic is a mixture of versions. As mentioned already, the method of preparing critical edition of the Mahabharata can be evolved only from a special study of the manuscripts of the Mahabharata and the Mahabharata manuscript tradition. So I will explain how the collation is done. There is a line, very important line in the Mahabharata. The line is Mahatvat Bharavatvacha Mahabharata Muchyate. And we have a very important variant reading. It is like this: Mahatvat Bharatatvacha Mahabharata Muchyate. So we have two readings, Bharavatvacha and Bharatatvacha. And then you will see various manuscripts mentioned in their abbreviations. For example, KO6, B3, DA1, DA2, D14, G2, and so on. Also, there are some other manuscripts where we have a different readings towards the end, Mahabharata Muchyate or Mahabharata Mityuta. So we have two major readings, Bharavatvacha and Bharatatvacha, and also Mahabharata Muchyate and Mahabharata Mityuta. How to prepare a critical edition, how to ascertain the reading? Normally people think, okay, Mahabharata means Mahatvat Bharatatvacha. But Suktankar accepts the reading Mahatvat Bharavatvacha Mahabharata Muchyate. And he has a sound basis for that. That basis is the best family of the Mahabharata, best family of the manuscripts of the Mahabharata. And why the popular etymology of the Mahabharata has the constituents like Mahatvat and Bharavatvacha? It is Mahan, great, and burdensome. It's a great burden. It is very heavy, it is bulky. That is the, what to say, explanation of the word Mahabharata. It is not grammatically justified, but it is a popular etymology of the word Mahabharata. So the popular etymology of Mahabharata is not Mahat and Bharata, but Mahat and Bharat. That is what he thought, and the same he adopted in the critical edition. This is called collation and ascertaining the reading. Now, the next stage is emendation. Emendation is the necessary correction in the recension so as to arrive at a more sensible reading that leads one closer to the autograph. And the final product of this process is a critically edited text based mostly on the best family of the manuscripts in a particular recension that is accepted for the critical edition. So, in the case of Mahatvad Bharavatvacha Mahabharatam Uchyate, it is now clear why he accepted the reading which is seemingly incorrect, seemingly obviously ungrammatical, but it is what is the text, it is the text which is closer to the autograph. So one can think that the original version of the Mahabharata had these lines, Mahatvat Bharavatvacha. Later on, the Pandits or scholars or the scribes, they thought that it was not correct. So they corrected the same line and made a change, Mahatvad Bharatatvacha Mahabharatam Uchyate, which was not the original reading according to Suktankar. Suktankar and other editors of different parvans of the Mahabharata used several manuscripts and other sources for ascertaining the constituent text. Besides the manuscripts, the commentaries on the Mahabharata also form one of the evidences. Their commentaries are based on the text they had used. The commentaries are called testimonia, which means evidence of a partial nature other than the direct evidence of the manuscripts. The evidence found in the quotations, commentaries, translations, adaptations, resumes, parodies, and so on. They are valuable sources that include a variety of text and the readings at times of different nature. There are additions and omissions, interpolations and corruptions, making the text of preparing critical edition difficult and challenging. The purpose of these additions, omissions, etc. could be manifold. In the work like the Mahabharata, several poets and scholars in ancient times were tempted to insert their own versifications or poetry, giving thereby the status of an epic to their own creative writing. In India, the poets hardly disclose their identity. On the contrary, they ascribed their own poems to famous poets like Kalidasa so that their creative writings would get a status of a poem penned by a famous poet. Similarly, in the case of the Mahabharata, there are additions made by later poets. There are certain narratives under the names of Akhyanas and Upakhyanas that had been popular once upon a time. These narratives were also added to the epic with the same purpose. There could be a number of motives behind such additions or even omissions. Secondly, the text transmitted through the oral tradition undergoes many changes, giving scope to variant readings. This is but natural. While reciting a verse, one tends to forget the exact words and then fills up the lacunae by inserting his own words. These changes take place and then creep into the manuscript. Then they become an integral part of the particular version. Sometimes the copyists or scribes jot down some portion in the margin called marginalia, and perhaps it is done for the sake of memorizing it later. Eventually, that portion in the margin or marginalia gets inserted in the body of the text and becomes a part of that work. The scribes at times make mistakes while copying the text. And a second hand, or later copyist or scribe tries to correct the mistakes merely by guesswork, and he does not bother to consult an authentic source. Sometimes the scribe thinks that a particular reading of a text is obscure, grammatically defective. He fails to understand the exact meaning of such a reading, and using his knowledge of grammar or prosody or metrics, he revises the text so that it could appear logical, comparing the old inferior reading. This seemingly inferior or corrupt reading is most probably the original reading coming directly from the poet himself. This is called lectio difficilior, or a hard reading, a defective reading, the more difficult of the two readings. As a general convention, though not mandatory in every case, the reading called lectio difficilior is to be accepted as an authentic reading or a reading closer to the autograph. I shall give a much debated and important decision Suktankar takes purely on the basis of the methodology he adopted. While recovering an authentic text, the editor has to handle these problems carefully. First, he separates the interpolated text from the constituted one and puts them in an appendix. Also, he would record all variants, even scribal errors, separately in the section called critical apparatus. Thus, he would not ignore even defective evidence, so that a reader, while going through the constituted text, would also be able to see the additions and omissions, corruptions, scribal errors, and so on. The editor does not claim that the text he constitutes is the perfect one, closer to the autograph. There would be a difference of opinion among the scholars. Some of them would sincerely feel that the text that is supposed to be an interpolation is an integral part of the work. It is necessary, therefore, to make all the evidence available to the readers by recording all variants and scribal errors faithfully, so that his method should sound reliable. In the case of the Mahabharata, Sukthankar has used all these devices and has prepared a constituted text of the Adi Parvan. All the material that does not form a part of this text, that is constituted text, is available in the critical apparatus and appendixes. One can easily find the difference between the constituted text and the two previous editions, namely the Bombay edition and the Madras edition. When the critical edition of the Mahabharata was completed, it received a thunder of praise from scholars in India and abroad. For instance, Professor Maurice Winternitz, who first expressed the need of the critical edition of Mahabharata, said, I quote his words, "The Adi Parvan in Dr. Suktankar's critical edition of the Mahabharata is now complete, and I have no hesitation in saying that this is the most important event in the history of Sanskrit philology since the publication of Max Muller's edition of the Rigveda with Sayan's commentary." And I can repeat now what I said in my paper read at the 17th International Congress of Orientalists at Oxford in 1928. The critical edition of which we now see The beginning will contain a text infinitely superior to any of the editions that are available at present. Now let us see the names of the editors and other staff of the Mahabharata department, the unsung heroes who work hard for several years and completed the work of all 18 Parvas and the Harivansha. Now let us see some photos. For example, the ceremony held at Bhandarkar Institute on the completion of the Mahabharata. The function was presided over by Dr. Radhakrishnan, President of India. Dr. P.V. Cherian, Governor of Maharashtra and the President of the Bhandarkar Orient Research Institute, said in his welcome speech, he said, a 50-year dream nourished through two generations comes to fruition today. The critical edition of India's great epic begun in 1919 is now complete. The great scholars who embarked on this momentous task and their generous patrons who could not have asked for a more distinguished figure than our revered president to honor this historic occasion and to announce to the world of scholarship the completion of this work. Dr. R.N. Dandekar, the then secretary, honorary secretary of the institute, said, the great Vangmaya Satra, for which the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute had got itself initiated over 4 decades ago, has now been brought to a successful consummation. It is indeed my great good fortune that I have been privileged to offer Purnahuti, the concluding oblation in this Satra, in the form of the Anushasana Parva, which is the last Parvan in the critical edition of the Mahabharata, to be published by the Institute. I must, however, hasten to add that, like any other sacrifice, the project of the critical edition has been a huge cooperative enterprise, a veritable Sambhuya Samutthana, and the credit for its fulfillment belongs collectively to all the workers of the Institute, whether academic or non-academic. All that I would say on this occasion is that we all fondly cherish the opportunity given to us to be associated with this noble work, and that we humbly rejoice at the thought that we have been instrumental in the redemption of the pledge which Institute had taken nearly half a century ago. On that occasion, Dr. Radhakrishnan, President of India, said, the unity of India is not based on geographical factors alone, but also on its great heritage like the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is a perceptive record of a mighty period in India's history. The great Indian epic has been very popular and also spread in countries of the Far East, Indochina, and Indonesia. The principal lesson of the Mahabharata is that the supremacy of dharma and of the law conforming to it has to be recognized and respected for survival in the world. The dharma integrates the society while adharma disintegrates it. The lesson of the Mahabharata have a special relevance and significance in the context of the present, not only for the people of India who appear to be lost in the pursuit of worldly enjoyments, material benefits, and superficial happiness, but also for the whole humanity, which appears at present to have lost its moorings. The critical edition of the Mahabharata is a monument to Indian scholarship. Now we can see some of the reviews on the critical edition of the Mahabharata and also Harivamsha, which was published in 1969. After the completion of the edition, the critical edition of the Mahabharata, the Institute sent the copies to several scholars and institutes and received very good reviews from various scholars. Although there were several reviews, here I will just speak about two of them. First, I will quote Swami Ranganathananda, head of the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Cultures. He said, I quote, "The successful completion of so stupendous a work of great cultural significance to all lovers of Indian thought and culture is an event worthy of joyous celebration. It is an occasion for all of us to remember with gratitude the groups of scholars, editors, and assistants who labored with scientific efficiency and wholehearted dedication to crown the Institute's ambitious program with success." Another scholar I would like to quote is Professor A. L. Basham, the author of the wonderful book, The Wonder That Was India. He was from Australian National University, Canberra, Australia. He said, I quote, "This great work of Indian scholarship is indeed a landmark in the history of Sanskrit textual criticism. The critical edition of the Mahabharata has become an essential source book for the student of ancient history and culture, and it seems hardly likely that it will ever be replaced. It will remain for centuries as a permanent memorial to the scholarship and patience of a devoted band of Sanskritists who have produced one of the world's remarkable and important monuments of classical scholarship." As Vyasa, the author of the Mahabharata, has said, a number of Sanskrit poets in ancient times have written plays based on the stories from the Mahabharata. For instance, I would like to mention Bhasa, a poet who wrote as many as 13 short plays, some of which are based on the Mahabharata. In his play Urubhangam, that is Broken Thigh, it is based on the last fight between Duryodhana and Bhima, in which Bhima kills Duryodhana. In this play, Duryodhana has been depicted in a manner different from what we think about that Kaurava king. Another play is Karna Bharam, means burden of burden of Karna. It is another one act play of Bhasa. The play describes the agonies of Karna on the previous day of the Kurukshetra war. This play is essentially the retelling of an episode of the Indian epic Mahabharata, and about the story, and the story is narrated in this play has a different perspective. It is perhaps the only tragedy in the classical Sanskrit literature. There are other plays of Bhasa based on the stories from the Mahabharata. They are Pancharatram, Dutavakyam, Madhyama Vyayogam, and Duta Ghatotkacham. Famous poet Kalidasa, in his famous play Abhijnana Shakuntala, he also borrows the story from the Mahabharata. This play is Abhijnana Shakuntala is also based on the Mahabharata. However, Kalidasa depicts the hero and the heroine, namely Dushyant and Shakuntala, in the manner different from what Vyasa portrays. Magha, a 7th century Sanskrit poet, wrote a poem, a Mahakavya called Shishupala Vadham, that is, slaying of Shishupala by Krishna with his Sudarshana Chakra. It is also based on the Mahabharata. Bhattanarayana's poem Veni Samharam and Bharavi's Kiratarjuniyam have the plot borrowed from the Mahabharata. Let us turn to modern times. In modern times, there have been many plays and novels on the themes from this great epic. Dharmavir Bharati, you perhaps know the name. Dharmavir Bharati's play in Hindi, Andha Yug, the Blind Epoch. It was staged by Ibrahim Al-Qazi and many other directors. Marathi novelist V.S. Khandekar wrote in 1960 a novel Yayati in Marathi on the life of King Yayati. This is one of the best novels of Khandekar that has won the prize of Sahitya Akademi. Girish Karnad also staged the play Yayati in Kannada. Pratibha Rai, a Jnanapeeth award winning writer in Oriya, wrote a novel entitled Yajnaseni from Draupadi's perspective. And S.L. Bhairappa wrote a novel Parva in Kannada. This is also a retelling of the Mahabharata. Coming to Indian cinema, the Mahabharata is also reinterpreted by Shyam Benegal in his Kali Yuga. And B.R. Chopra's television series Mahabharata became extremely popular and it is still popular. In the beginning of this series, Chopra specifically mentions the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute and the critical edition of the Mahabharata. The series was directed by Ravi Chopra and was televised on India's national television, that is Doordarshan. In this connection, I must make a reference to Peter Brook's 9-hour play Mahabharata and its 5-hour movie version, the Mahabharata. I would like to conclude my speech with the famous verses from the Mahabharata. Vyasa says, Yo vidya chaturo vedan sangopanishadan dvijaha nachakyanamidam vidyan naiva sasyad vichakshanaha श्रुत्वा त्विदमुपाख्यानम श्राव्यम अन्यन न रोचते पुंस्कोकिलरुतं श्रुत्वा रूक्षा ध्वांशस्य वागिव इतिहासोत्तमादस्मात् जायन्ते कविबुद्धयः पंचभ्य इव भूतेभ्यो लोकसंविधयस्त्रयः अस्याख्यानस्य विषये पुराणं वर्तते द्विजाः अंतरिक्षस्य विषये प्रजा इव चतुर्विधाः क्रियागुणानां सर्वेषाम् इदमाख्यानमाश्रयः इंद्रियाणां समस्तानां चित्रा इव मनः क्रिया अनाश्रित्यैतदाख्यानं कथा भुवि न विद्यते आहारम् अनपाश्रित्य शरीरस्येव धारणम् इदं कविवरैः सर्वैः आख्यानमुपजीव्यते इदं कविवरैः सर्वैः आख्यानमुपजीव्यते उदय प्रेप्सुभिर्भृत्यैरभिजात इवेश्वरः. And the translation of these verses is, a twice born who is a learned one, expert in the Vedas, the Vedanga text and the Upanishads, but does not know this account of the Mahabharata, cannot be said to have any learning at all. Having heard this account, so worthy of being heard, no other account will seem pleasing. Like the harsh cry crows of crows, sounds to one who has heard the cuckoo's sweet melody. Like the three words have evolved from the five elements, the inspirations of poets flow from this supreme history. O Brahmanas, just as the four kinds of beings are derived from the sky, all the Puranas draw upon this account. Like the senses depend upon all the varied workings of the mind, all actions and all qualities are dependent on this account. There is no tale on the earth that is not based on this account, just as it is impossible for the body to be alive without food. Like servants who wish to advance or prosper, always live off high-born masters. All great poets make a living off this account. Thank you very much.